Welcome to the Low Post. I'm Eric Stark, joined by my co-host Mike Gross, and we're happy to be with you. We're also happy that the Sixers went out and made a move in the free agent market, Mike. They got out and signed the biggest free agent name that was out there, Elton Brand, a power forward, really fits the Sixers' need. How does this really reshape the Sixers team, do you think?
Well, I think it's huge for the Sixers on a couple of levels. No, number one, he's a 20 and 10 guy, 20 points, 10 rebounds a game. He has been consistently for his career. There's maybe 6 or 8 guys in the whole league that you can say that about. Number two, he's a guy who gets those numbers by catching it on the low post with his back to the basket, and that makes defenses do all these different things to pay attention to him. But what's interesting about it is I think it's going to have a ripple effect in terms of kind of clarifying roles for guys on the Sixers and really makes the mix of their team seem a whole lot better and makes their team make a whole lot of sense. Samuel Dalembert becomes a real center now who can just kind of concentrate on shot blocking and rebounding and playing defense.
And that's what he's good at.
Right, yeah. Exactly. Thaddeus Young, I think, becomes a small forward. Theoretically, there's going to be competition for some of these jobs, but I think that's how it's going to play out. And if you notice the way he's played out in Las Vegas for the Sixers in the summer league, he's really putting up numbers. I think he's a star in the making, kind of. Andre Iguodala becomes, I think, a 2 guard, assuming they re-sign him and all of that stuff. I think his role kind of he and Young were both kind of multi-position swingman type guys. Now I think their role becomes clarified. Willie Green goes to the bench. Reggie Evans goes to the bench, which is where I think both of those guys ought to be. Lou Williams becomes kind of a dynamic change of pace guy at point guard and will be able to play a little bit together with their starting point guard, Andre Miller. So I just think that this is a great move on a lot of levels, and one of them is the kind of ripple effect that it's going to have throughout the rest of the team in terms of setting their team up and making sense of the way their players mix together.
I agree with you. I still think they need to get a shooter. There is one rumor out there, Chad Ford of ESPN.com has said that there could be a sign and trade type thing with Lewis Williams involved with the Chicago Bulls, maybe Jason Smith, maybe their number 1 draft pick that they just got, Maurice Spates going to Chicago, and bringing back Ben Gordon, who is one of the best guys off the dribble in the NBA right now, and just a great outside shooter, which would, when you throw the ball inside to Elton Brand, he can kick it back out for the outside shot. Somebody, maybe it's just a free agent move they can make where they can bring somebody in. So I'm still waiting to see what they do there. But they said I think they got the depth on this bench now is really good too.
That to me is giving up a lot for Ben Gordon. I think there are guys around the league who are. I think that skill of just being a off the ball shooter guy is kind of undervalued a little bit. I think that's an area where you might be able to get bargains, but. Ben Gordon would fit with their team. I think he's a real nice player.
Yeah, they're almost capped out of salary cap room now after Elton Brand, but they have about a $1.2 million trade exemption thing they can use for this. Okay, it's all. I mean, he's very technical with this stuff.
It's very technical.
One of the names is J.J. Redick that could possibly be freed up in Orlando. Because, again, a spot up shooter. He's not somebody off the dribble, but if you leave him in open space. He's a pretty good outside shooter. So somebody like that off your bench.
I like the idea of Redick because he was a truly great college basketball player. But we just don't know how good a pro he is. He just hasn't played enough at the NBA level. I just have no idea what to think about J.J. Redick.
Yeah, so
although he does seem to be the right type. I think that's the right type that they should be looking for.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned there's about 6 guys in the NBA that do what Brand does. Actually, there's only 3 other guys that does what he does. He's one of 4. Okay. Let me give you some names: Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett.
What is the criteria you're talking about?
20 points, 10 rebounds right
now. For their career.
Currently in the NBA.
And actually, Shaq is not that anymore.
No.
Clearly. So that narrows it down even more. Interesting.
And funny, Elton Brand was at 20 points for his career now, but that's because he only averaged 17 last year. He only played 8 games coming back from the Achilles tendon. He had a serious injury, but to his credit, he came in the last 8 games. I thought maybe to showcase himself, and then the rumor was he wasn't going to come out anyhow. And we say he opted out of his contract. He did that late, Mike. And it's funny, we were talking last week. We filmed a whole segment, folks, about how the Sixers weren't going to get him. He's going to stay West, and, well, why not just roll the footage? Why don't we show this? Get this to happen the way they wanted. They wanted Elton Brand. Elton Brand's not leaving the West Coast. He's either going to stay with the Clippers or maybe Golden State because they just offered up more money.
Elton Brand is he's in show business now. He's not going to want to leave Los Angeles to come to Philadelphia. That's not going to happen. This has been sold as a situation that had much more potential than it in fact has.
It never had it. Yeah, like we said, last week had it all together.
We had it wired.
You wrote a column about this, and it was in the Sunday paper last week, talking about we had this all done. And I said to Paul, I saw a report on ESPN.com. Put on my headset, listened to a radio show, and it looked like this was actually going to happen. Called you up at home, told Paul, you better get ready to cut this. And you called Paul at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, the show ran a little long last week, and we were wondering what we were going to cut. And by the end of the day, Tuesday, we knew what we were going to cut.
The Sixers and Elton Brand helped us to make that decision. We didn't want to look we didn't want to look dumb. So.
But give us enormous credit for calling it on ourselves, as we're doing right now.
Yes.
We have no clue.
But, you and I were talking as we were putting this together. That is one of the neat things, I think, with men and why they get involved with sports so much. It is all the guessing and second-guessing and why fantasy sports has taken off in this country. Here we are trying to guess what some guy in California was going to do when all of his family was here on the East Coast. His wife was about to give birth to their first child. It made a lot of sense, if you think of it that way, why he wouldn't come east. But again, here we are again, just speculating what's going on in somebody's mind.
It's one of the many, many areas, and I say this so many times, but it's one of the many areas where the proliferation of media has changed sports. When I was a kid, everybody wanted to be a player. Now everybody wants to be a GM.
Yeah. Exactly, you're
you
exactly right. And/or I wanted to, after my playing career, and I stopped growing at 5'10", and started growing the other way. I said, all right, I want to be an announcer, and I want to start talking to you a little bit about announcers. I'll start off by asking, did you watch the Home Run Derby last night, Mike?
I did not.
And why?
Ask me why. The reason why is that I don't completely hate Chris Berman, but the thought of him and his caterwauling and his cliches and his yammering and I think for the first time in my life, I completely blew off watching a sports event on television that I otherwise would have watched, and the entire reason I blew it off was the announcer. I just didn't want to listen to Chris Berman.
That's interesting. I'm that way with Dick Vitale anymore. And when we were talking, I got a big laugh. When Duke plays North Carolina, that game does not need any hype at all. And he sits there during the game screaming, well, this is the greatest game ever.
He's nothing but hype.
And I have to mute the television, almost turning it off. I didn't watch the home run last. I watched the highlights of it. And Josh Hamilton, 28 in the first round. Wow, that's fantastic.
It's incredible, yeah.
But you're right. The announcers does make a difference anymore. And Chris Berman in the early 80s was pretty fun with the nicknames. One of the best ones, and he's our manager now with the Barnstormers, is Von Purple Haze. I loved it. But you know what?
Julio, won't you take me on a sea cruise?
Great stuff.
Thank you.
But the shtick is going on. He's always become a character of himself. You know,
not almost.
Yeah.
He's there. He's full blown.
And Vitale, Berman, these guys are both ESPN guys. I just think they need to evaluate who they've got. Billy Packer is a guy that I've never had a problem with, and it's been, I just saw in the ticker yesterday on the bottom of one of these sports shows that he is no longer the head man for and the lead guy for CBS's college basketball. What are your thoughts with Billy Packer being let go now?
Well, the thing about Billy Packer, well, I don't hate him either, and I think you and I are a cult of two in the world in that regard. He's just become this incredibly reviled personality. A lot of the criticism of him, I think, is overblown, but not completely. I think in recent years he really has become kind of a shill for the big conferences, the TV conferences in college basketball, and did lose his fastball, I thought, later in his career. This is a guy who was doing college basketball on television long before John Wooden stopped coaching at UCLA. I mean, the entire NCAA tournament big time era
started with
Billy
him, right?
Packer has been doing it on television, and I almost wonder if anybody can last that long in that kind of a role on television. I almost think it's almost impossible.
And he's the only college announcer that I remember with CBS. I don't remember anybody else there with them. You asked me if I remember him with Al McGuire. I don't remember the two of them teaming up together, but I've seen footage. I've heard footage of it and seen old games. But to think in my lifetime, I'm 36 years old, that my time with basketball, he's the only guy that I've heard that voice. Now, you said longevity. I'm thinking back. I found an old NBA game that had Brett Musburger, 1975, doing an old CBS
Wow.
game. Yeah. Now, he's lasted a long time, but he hasn't stuck with one sport and been the lead guy the whole time either. He's gone into a studio, been an anchor, so forth. To think what Billy Packer has done since, like you said, the mid-'70s, and when college basketball really took off, probably '79 as far as television went, the Bird-Johnson game, that was Billy Packer, Al McGuire doing that one on NBC then.
And I thought Packer and McGuire were real good together. Very, very different type guys. Packer more of a technician, McGuire more of a poet, sort of at heart. And the contrast, I thought there really worked effectively, and they were great. And I did not think that Packer was as good by himself. But I didn't think he was horrible either. This just. Vilification of this guy is Deadspin. The website Deadspin.com had a little piece about this situation yesterday, and they referred in their headline to Billy Packer as the Archangel of Death.
Wow,
that might be a little over the top. I leave it to you, viewer, but maybe that's a little over the top.
I think it might be a little over the top. There's been times in the past where he's made some comments or picked on the mid-major conferences, or he one time went after a woman reporter that I thought if that was the time to fire him, maybe then. But not. He had a pretty good year, I thought. This last year, I sort of enjoyed what he did.
That's one of the things I wrote about this.
In your blog.
Which I really thought he had his best NCAA tournament in years this year. And this is the time they let him go. It's kind of strange. And the one thing he said that made people mad this year was in the North Carolina-Kansas national semifinal when it was like 48-12 or whatever it was in the first half, and he said this game is over, and people were all enraged. I mean, how many millions of people sitting around bars in America were saying this game is over at that? I mean, they were. They had to be.
I was one of them.
But Billy, sure, and Billy Packer gets vilified for it. He was at the point where maybe it had to end because there was just no winning for Billy Packer at this point.
Speaking of Packer, let's talk about another Packer, a Green Bay Packer. How's that transition? You like that?
Smooth.
Brett Favre. We talked a little bit about him last week. I know people in July do not want to be talking about Brett Favre, but I think it's a story that just keeps on taking on layers and just spinning. What are your thoughts now? The Green Bay Packers, let me fill people in if you didn't know, are saying, sure, now they've made some comments. They're saying, sure, we'll take him back, but he's going to be our backup quarterback to Aaron Rodgers. What is your take with everything?
Well, number one, he's not going to be the backup quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. That's not going to happen. That's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. All sides are in a tough spot here. The Packers certainly are. Brett Favre has put them in a difficult position. There's no question about that. But a backup quarterback, that's just not going to happen. That might happen the first day of first week of training camp, let's say. Aaron Rodgers will be running with the first team when they're doing their drills and all that kind of stuff, and he'll be taking snaps with the first team. But when they get ready to play football games, if you have Favre on your team and Aaron Rodgers on your team, who's going to be the starting quarterback? Starkey.
That's basically my question from last week was if you had the choice of those two. I think, honestly, if I was Brett Favre, I would shrug and say that's fine and come back and do that because it wouldn't be long before it would be evident that he needs to be the starter out there. The other thing was Aaron Rodgers played 2 games last year. One game was the Dallas game where Favre actually looked really bad in the game and then got hurt. Rodgers came in, went back to what the Packers had done well last year, which was throw the short passes and let their athletic wide receivers create space and get yardage. But Rodgers got hurt in that game. And quite frankly, if Favre couldn't have come back in the next game, which he did, as his streak is still alive of consecutive starts, Aaron Rodgers couldn't have. He gets banged up very easily. So I don't think it would take Favre very long to be back in there because Rodgers would be hurt. But I don't think it's going to happen.
But the thing is, the Packers saying that he can come back as a backup
is dumb.
That as a gesture, Brett Favre is offended by that.
Sure. And
Brett Favre is bothered by that. So but you can understand the Packers kind of saying, okay, it's time for us to get on with our lives, and we've got to commit to this other guy in order to do that. So I mean, everybody's sort of jammed into this extremely difficult spot, and I don't know what the answer to it is, but I just know that Brett Favre is not going to be the second-string quarterback. He's not going to be standing on the sidelines with a clipboard and a baseball hat. Not going to happen.
I think in the long run, it's going to be a bad move by the Packers because the best quarterback they could put on that team would be Brett Favre over Aaron Rodgers. But I think what's going to happen, because they've already game planned for Aaron Rodgers, is Favre will wind up somewhere else, probably Tampa Bay. But if they could do it, they'd probably put him in somewhere like Kansas City, so that he's away from them in a different conference.
But that's almost like the Packers are sending this guy away to be bullheaded.
Yeah,
don't you think? I mean, is it in the best interest of your football team to send Brett Favre away? It's just I don't know a good answer to this.
It's also a general manager that's being bullheaded too. It seems
right. I think that's accurate. Yeah.
We mentioned this, and I think the best way to sum it up was yesterday on the ESPN2 show called First Take. They have Skip Bayless always sort of argues with somebody else that's there, usually a sports writer. Well, this time it was the philosopher there. He becomes a philosopher, rapper/actor Nelly, okay? He had summed it up the best, I thought, yesterday. He said,
let me tell you something. Nelly can flat out break it down, baby.
I was actually really impressed with him. He held his own with Skip Bayless on a couple different issues.
Okay.
On this one, I was sort of stunned, but he said, with Favre, this would be like you saying to your spouse, I want a divorce, going away for a few months, and then coming back to the house and saying, I changed my mind, I want to stay with you, but your spouse has already moved on and found somebody, and somebody younger. What are you going to do?
Wow, that brings it home to everybody. Everybody can relate to the Nelly analogy.
Yeah. Set me up for the stat of the week, Mike.
First of all, I'm stunned that you have a stat of the week because we were talking about this earlier and I didn't think you did. So like the rest of the viewing community, I await with bated breath Starkey's.
I'm going to go with 1. The amount of home runs that Brett Myers has given up in 3 minor league outings. Of course, that's against double-A competition, and some of those guys that were really good weren't even at the game that he was playing in, but 1. And next week we'll probably talk more about the state of Brett Myers and the Phillies. So this is our little teaser as well as the stat of the week.
Ew, it's a teaser.
Until next week, I'm Eric Stark, along with my host Mike Gross and our producer Paul France. We'll see you again from the Low Post.